Okay, so I'm beginning. Uh, right. So before beginning, I'd like to add one thing for all of those who are viewing this. That the purpose of this, whatever I'm going to share right now, is to share with you guys my story, such that you have an understanding of my data points, right? And you get to decide and make decisions based on those. So you basically get to capitalize on my experience, right? Another important point that I'd like to highlight here is that um, I like whatever resources or choices or prescriptions that I'll be sharing are truly based on my personal experience, things that worked out for me or did not, and basically those are based on my personal experience, right? So but I'd still suggest you guys to experiment, at least experiment with those, because the things that have worked out for me may also work very well for you as well, right? So with that, I think we can begin. And so let's dive into the deck. So first of all, like, why am I doing this? So the reason I'm doing this because at one point of time I was also at your stage, and while I was in my third or fourth year, I was thinking about giving GRE. There were a lot of questions that I had, like what would be a great resource for GRE, like where do I prepare the verbal from? Like I know I'm good at quant, like most of the engineers, but like how can I prepare the verbal part? How can I ace the verbal part? What words should I refer to? Since there are so many lists out there, so you've got those 900, then you've got some apps, then you've got some hit parades, like you name it, you have it all, right? And it becomes too confusing. So my purpose was to help you guys share the material which worked out for me, and I really hope that it will work out for you as well. Right. Okay. So let me tell you about my prep and what things I did. So my score, so my target score was a 320 plus, and I've spent around some 2 months, which I did not in my bachelor's, but while I was working. So I started preparing in uh, before October and gave my exam around November, right? And the material that I used was for quant, I used the ETS official guides, right? Obviously, you need to do that. And then I also referred Arun Sharma, and there was a friend of mine who shared some resources from Dembori, so I prepared from that. And in the verbal part, what I did was refer to the ETS official material, which is pure gold, by the way. And I also refer to Manhattan and Jamboree stuff, right? Um, Now, let me tell you what happened when I did this. And so this was my target score, but what score did I actually receive? So I scored a 315, right? It's not a great score, definitely. And the split was 153 in verbal and 162 in quant. So I guess that's it. So this was all about my preparations. So do you guys have any questions? Like you can shoot me, shoot your questions, but let me tell you, like this is not the end of the story. This is rather the beginning of the story. I did not stop at 315. It was basically what I wasn't expecting. So I worked on my score, and so before beginning on what resources I actually used again, like later, let me share with you an example which I think most of us would be able to relate to. So I believe most of us were quite familiar with the physics of 11th class, and that's why I chose this example. So I was a fan of mechanics, especially the linear mechanics. So let me share this example with you. So for example, let's consider that you are preparing for uh, your mechanics test, and you have done all sort of questions like this, right? You've drawn, what an FPD is, what the vector diagrams are, how to solve these equations. If one is unknown, for example, friction, and you've been given, say, weight and acceleration, you can easily pull out what's the friction, right? But just imagine you've prepared questions like these, when the block is sliding or the block is not sliding, static friction, kinetic friction. But what if the actual test brings a question like this, where we are, like, I personally found this question to be quite complex the first time I observed it, right? So the first time I faced it. So, the questions like these, when you get to have the force on the first block and you are to define the acceleration on the third one, right? So this is an example that I'm sharing here because this is what exactly happened when I gave my first GRE test. So what I mean by that is that while I was preparing from some of the resources, for example, Manhattan, right? And what happened was that the real test was quite different. It was really different. So when you are going to encounter the real test, the quality of questions that you're going to see would be completely different from that you see in Manhattan, right? The sentence structure, the complexity, maybe not vocab. It's the Manhattan is also quite full of vocab, but sentence structure is quite complex, right? And it's not a very straight structure. So, for example, many times I've seen that uh, tend to I do not see commas where they should have been according to my perception, right, or my knowledge. And so you get a little confused with that kind of writing. And so the writing that EPS or GRE has is the academic writing. And this is quite different from the regular stuff we read, like maybe in places like a good daily or some of your novels, right? It's a different class altogether. So this was the reason that I realized that on the test day, it was a very different experience for me because the test was quite different than what I had prepared from basically Manhattan. I'm talking about the verbal part, right? So this led to me to realize that there was quite difference, and I needed to overcome that. And I wasn't settling with the 315. So it took me around 1 or 2 months to realize like what would be a good resource and why is every other resource just putting out those questions when the real test is going to be quite different. So I took material from Manhattan and Kaplan and a lot of other stuff as well. But it was after those 1 or 2 months of research I realized that there is a good resource which I am going to share with you. And like there's definitely excuse me, there's no one size fit all kind of a resource, but basically it's a good resource that I found for the verbal part, right? So talking about the resources that I just shared, so in the previous slide where there was 4 different segments that I was showing that what was my target score. So I've written all of it right here, and I'm gonna share while I look at the resources in the hindsight that what problem was I facing, or maybe what was a problem in the direction rather that I was facing. So talking about those 2 or 2.5 months that I took to prepare, I'd like to highlight that we have a kind of thinking that we have got some limited time to do this kind of test. But if you are preparing for a test and you are aiming for a high score, you should also realize that it may take some time, right? It's not that you all of us would be able to figure it out in a 1 month or 2 months, right? It may take a while. And it's basically dependent on the fact that what was your exposure to the language in the beginning, or maybe while you were in your bachelor's, or even before, right, in your schooling, right? So it may take some time, and everybody responds to it in a different manner, and everybody would take different time. So don't get pressurized and take your own time, right? Another thing that I'd like to point was that the resources that I used, the first was the Manhattan 5-pound book, which I used for verbal. And to put it simply this was a bad decision, right? It is not a great resource. It might have some good questions, but it's a different game. When you're not going to see those kind of questions in your real test, it's a waste, right? As I told you that the quality of questions that are going to be there in the real test are going to be really different, right? So the material that you should be using for the verbal part is the official ETS GRE material, right? And similarly goes for the Jamboree stuff as well. Talking about the quant material that I used, so for quant I used the official material. That's good. Sometimes Jamboree, that was basically for getting to know some of the formulas. So that also works, right? But the third was I focused a lot on Arun Sharma. That's a book which some of you might have seen is used for uh, preparation for CAT, right? And it was a mistake because it not only I wasn't just preparing for the game, right? I was preparing for a very different game. So it was a very clear mistake that and it was kind of an over design. I think people who are from mechanical and civil might be able to realize it well what an over design means. But so basically, I was preparing for a test that was quite different. It was testing some other parameters. It was maybe more difficult, but the real test that I should have prepared for was different. So I would say that you might be very. It might be quite tempting to prepare from resources that are quite harder than the one that are promoted for the actual test, but it may also like you may face some ramifications as well, right? This is what my point is. uh, Coming to the tests that I gave while I was preparing for the first time, so I gave Power Prep 1 and Power Prep 2. So the problem with Power Prep 1 was it's basically a little on the easier side if you compare it to the real test. So in Power Prep 1, I scored a 319, which kind of made me a little overwhelmed that, yeah, okay, so I'm at 319. I can easily prepare for test, and maybe while I'm preparing in the next test, which was Power Prep 2, I'd be doing very well. I'd be faring very well, and I'll be able to cross the 320 mark, which I was personally aiming for. But this was a mistake. While I gave Power Prep 2, since the fact I was quite overwhelmed with my performance in Power Prep 1, it didn't really help me with the studies, right? And I did improve, but not to the extent that I should have, right? And regarding the Power Prep 2 test, I gave it when I had only 1 week left to the real test. And I think it was a reality check kind of a sort because I scored a 315. I scored a 315 in Power Prep 2, and I was like quite shocked. But you know, uh, I had those 6 or 7 days with me that I had to prepare and re-strategize. But so these were the things that I did, and maybe you guys can do better because like I've shared my data points. You guys can experiment with what works for you. Right. So like after getting that 315 and after putting in that 1 and 2 months to realize that what would be a good resource for for maybe performing better on the verbal at least, what led me to giving GRE again was the fact that I realized that a GRE score is not just a score on paper. You get to have a lot of applications. Like on the learning part, it would mean that you get to learn a lot of stuff like critical reasoning and definitely some vocabulary, but you can do it otherwise as well. But critical reasoning and structured thinking, getting to know what you know, uh, maybe improving your power to comprehend a passage. Like it's 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 a it's a skill that might be underrated, but you can understand how much power you have when you are able to decipher your text. Right, it gives you a lot of power. You don't want to skip your passages wherever and whatever you guys are doing. Right. So another reason that I did, uh, I attempted and I did the exam again was the fact that these kind of standardized tests, like although in the COVID situation we do see that some of the universities are not like have like don't need GRE or GMAT anymore, but many still do, right? And let's face it that these kind of standardized tests put every single student or professional in the same shoes and tests their caliber, right? We all understand that every country, like many countries, including India and US, face a problem of grade inflation, right? The universities have been, giving students marks which are way above than the previous generation used to get, right? And so it becomes very difficult to judge students. So these kind of standardized tests give institutions an opportunity to scale students in a manner that just to scale their capabilities or their performance on one particular day. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't tag it for like on anyone's ability, but these kind of tell how the performance did on a single day, on a very standardized single day, right? So that's why I wanted to increase my score, and that's why I realized that I should give it a shot again. So this is the official score when I gave GRE for the second time. And if you add these two, my total score was a 326, and my analytical writing was a 4, which is quite an average. But like I focused a lot more on the verbal part and the quant part, right? And so what actually led to this increase in score from 315 to a 326 is what I will be sharing, and was the main aim that you guys get to know from this session, and you are have a better sense of direction, and you get to realize that what are some good steps that you can take if you are going in this direction. Right. For my second test, the material that I used for quant was the 5-pound Manhattan book, which is quite famous for its quant resources. But don't confuse the resources for, like, these do not need to be same for quant and verbal. Like, these are two very different games. The official resources play a very different role in both of these spaces. So, for example, if you are talking about the official OG material that is given for the quant, it may not suffice. I can speak this very honestly, that it would not suffice because the difficulty is not really up to par at what you see at the real test. So 5-pound is a very good resource here, but please mark my words, it is not a resource that you need to use for the verbal part. It's a resource that you can use for quant. Definitely for quant, I'd highly recommend it. Right. Additional resource that I'll talk about is Rehman, which I'll be talking in the subsequent slides when I'll be talking about the verbal part. Another resource that I used was GMAT. Now, you can talk about, since you, I previously spoke about the CAT, that since you said that it wasn't a great resource, why use GMAT, right? Because there's still a similarity between the pattern of CAT and GRE, because there's similar, because of the presence of similar syllabus, and these have kind of a similar apart from syllabus, they have similar kind of questions, and one of the type of questions, which is the problem solving. So DMAT has two kind of questions, which is data sufficiency, which is not really helpful, and it is definitely not going to be part in the real test for almost all of the questions. You might face one or two, which I saw in the final test. That question number 20 was something that asked that which of the statement would help sufficiently derive to the answer. So it is quite similar to the data sufficiency problems that you have in GMAT, but it was the only question that I saw in the test. That's it. So you need not prepare from those kind of questions. So there are the other type of questions in GMAT, official guides, obviously. I refer to the official guides only. And in fact, I didn't complete that as well, but I referred to some of the questions, some of the hard questions when I want to prepare for higher difficulty questions, right? So there is the second type of question in GMAT, which are the problem-solving questions. So you can definitely refer them. These are some high-quality questions. There are some 200 or 300 questions in each of the official guide and the quant guide. And so these are kind of helpful questions, and this is what helped me score the score that I got. Right. There are a few things though which I see in the hindsight that I could have done better, um, which are basically solving some of the hard OG questions. So maybe you can put more effort on those. And the real test is also a game of timing uh, in quant. So for the first section in quant, you might be able to handle it very well. So the first round, so how I did was I used to go it through all the questions in the first round and then go back to them for a QC round, so a quality control round, where I used to check all the questions through a different method. So I used to solve the paper in two, or the first section of the test in two ways, right? So maybe um, in the second round, you can plug in some new numbers, plug in some easy numbers to get to the results quickly, right? You can try those kind of techniques for the second quant section. Mm, but the problem in the second quant section that you're going to see is that there are some difficult questions in it, and it does not leave enough time, or I did not get enough time to complete my QC round or the second round in the second section, right? So you need to time it very well as well. And my recommendation would be that if you are preparing for it, if you can complete the second quant section with a QC round, I think you'd be doing very well in the test. And like it is a thing that I think I left and would have helped me score better than the 166 I did. Uh, Coming to the verbal part, and I think um, it's where I learned a lot. Um, it's where the my perspectives changed a lot, and this is basically to a resource that I found that I was talking about. So I found a resource, and it's called Greg Matt. And the line where magic happens is basically what I borrowed from his website, right? So it's a great resource that although I'm not associated with it in any way, but when you get to have something good, you also want others to use it, right? It is not going to benefit me in any way, but I want you guys to at least experiment with it. And definitely the resources that the guy shares are like amazing. The techniques that he's going to share are like, in other words, you don't get to see those, or at least you don't get to see those in a very clear fashion in the real in the books like Manhattan or Kaplan, right? You don't get to see them very clearly. In fact, the quality is that those techniques are quite subtle, and these have been prescribed in almost every other book, including the OG guide. So, for example, if you are preparing for the test and if you've gone through the techniques that Greg Matt shares, right, and after that, if you visit the official guide, you will realize that the techniques have been, or the pointers or the clues have been clearly defined by everyone. But the thing that Greg Matt does really well is the fact that he shares technique in a manner such that you can absorb it and you can practice it, you can apply it very well. While otherwise, if you're seeing like books like Manhattan, you only get to see them as answers, right? And it is quite difficult to figure out that how did they arrive at this result. Like if you have worked on Manhattan or other kind of even the OG, right? You'll get to see that there are some questions which are tricky, and you don't get to realize that how did they arrive at this. And this is something that Greg Matt does really well, and I'd highly recommend this to anyone and everyone who is going to prepare for GRE and who needs help with the verbal part, especially for those who are aiming for 160s, right? And I can clearly attribute the increase in the score that I give to the techniques that I learned from Greg Matt. So it's an amazing resource. So I think I've promoted it enough. So let's get back to the resources that I use. So for practice, so one thing that Greg Matt also emphasizes, and it was kind of a learning that I got from my first attempt at GRE, was the fact that the third-party prep material or the questions that they share, especially in verbal, I'm talking about the verbal part. In quant, don't confuse this with the quant part. I'm talking only for the verbal part, right? For the verbal, the third-party test prep is almost something you don't need. In fact, I only prepared in my second attempt. I only prepared from the official material, which was the official guide. Then we have the verbal guide from ES, and then there is one very important resource which is not promoted that much, but it was basically the foundation of all the practice that I did for my test. So it is called the old GRE book. So it is available. Like you can find it very easily if you are searching for it. Right, you'd find it very easily. You can order it as well, but it's available, and I guess you guys can understand it. Um, it's an amazing resource. So what it is that these are actual 27 tests that ETS has written. The only difference is that it has a pattern that belongs to the previous pattern of GRE. That's why it's called old GRE. But the questions, the type of questions, the quality it has clearly is equivalent to the real test that you're gonna see. And I can vouch for it because I have prepared for it. I gave out of the 27 tests, I gave around 9 tests from it. I practiced those 9 tests, and it turned out to be really helpful. And the difficulty equivalence, if I can say, was almost same. Like almost same. Like I couldn't even the only difference that I found in the real test was the way that they refer to some clue in the test. So these days, what they do is they highlight those tests rather than calling it in the question that this quoted word, what does that mean, or what is the function of that word. These days, they simply highlight in the text or the passage that they share. Right. So Old GRE is an amazing resource. I'd highly recommend it. And this is what was the foundation of my preparation. And talking about the technique, so as I said, QuakeMat is what I used. So it has amazing techniques, and in fact, it almost talking about it has techniques for both comprehension passages, short passages, long passages, different techniques for each of the passages, and for both text completion and sentence equivalence. And if I share some more insight, so if you are preparing from those techniques, you would almost find solving text completion and sentence equivalence as if you're solving a quant question. You have almost a formula with you, you have almost your techniques with you, and you just need to find your clues, fit in the technique, and you get the answer. It becomes almost quite mechanical in a way, right? And it's gonna be really important to improve your scores. And let me tell you, if you there while you are in your prep, there are times when you will face a plateau, right? I think since you guys have already given some kind of test previously, you might understand that there comes a time when you arrive at a point that you do not see us like a steep growth, right? So I'm talking about that kind of a plateau. So at this point of time, what you need to do is go back to the techniques, and these kind of techniques that Rehman shares will be really helpful, right? Um, Talking about the words that I did for vocab, so I almost did some 1,500 words, and so let me share it with you. So with the techniques that I used from GitMat and the words that I used, the words that I prepared for, I encountered only one question in my second verbal section, which I had no idea about because it was a sentence equivalence question. It had only one clue, and the clue was a word that I didn't know. I didn't know. So I only encountered only one question in the whole of the test out of those 40 questions, 40 verbal questions. In fact, I had 3 verbal sections. The experiment session was also a verbal one. So out of the 60 questions, there was only a single question that I uh, couldn't understand that what was required out of it because I just didn't know the meaning of. So what I'm suggesting here is that the 1,500 words I did would be a good resource if you are in for a score in like about 325 or the around 330 or below 330. Right. So what I did was I prepared from the Mutiur vocab app, which has those easy, moderate, and hard sections to it, and those are some 1,000 words, and that's what I did. Apart from it, on Rehman's website, you can also find his list of words. So out of those words, there are a lot of words that are common to the Madhusha. I personally find Madhusha to be a great resource notes while you were working, trying to memorize words, and while it may not give you an exact application in almost all of the cases, but it's still a great resource, using flashcards. So I use the Magoo's vocabulary app. I also did words from Craigmax list. So there was an overlap between Magoo's and Craigmax. So I funneled some 300 words out of it. And then there was my personal list of 150 words. So like I did not search for them like what would be the best words. The words I picked for this list were the ones that I realized that I see almost in everyday text that I read or find, but I just don't know the meaning of. For example, I used to get very confused between intrinsic and intrinsic. So these were the words that I put in this list, and so kind of personalizing it according to my understanding and my experience, right? So this is what I did, and one final resource that I'd like to share is that um, apart from the passages that you get to see in the old GRE and the official resources, if you are trying to supplement your reading, you can also refer to a website. It's called AL Daily. So it has got some notes, some columns, and it's almost a very curated section of academic writing. And basically, it gives it can give you an experience of those, if I may say, the dry passages that you may encounter in GRE, right? So one thing that I'd also like to share at this point is that while you are preparing, you shouldn't do only those passages that you are interested in. For example, there are a lot of passages in GRE which belong to science, so you get to you may be interested in astronomy, so you might find a passages like that, a few passages like that. However, you should also prepare for those dry passages. Maybe if you're from if you don't like arts, you should also prepare those dry passages that you are not very interested in. Right, that will in fact help you build the qualities that you need in the real test. Right, so these were basically the resources that I used for my preparation for the verbal part. Uh, okay, so also I'd like to zone in on the part how I use the GridMat resources. So basically, GridMat has these free resources which I will suggest you guys to use because you can realize from them that it's a great resource. You do get to have a glimpse of 2 or 3 techniques which I'd suggest you experiment with and realize that it's like if they work for you or not. And if they do, you can simply go for the uh, premium service, and it's quite affordable. So you'll get to see. I don't want to promote it, but you'll get to see that it's quite affordable, right? So how I used it, because it's a great resource, I'd like to share how I did it. So what I did was I learned the techniques from Redmat, and it was basically the part that helped me in skill building and to overcome the plateaus that came in my prep journey. And so one downside to this approach is that Redmat uses the official questions only, which also gives you a result that once you have learned from his techniques, there are a lot of questions a lot of official OG questions that you have exhausted already, right? So you may not be able to may not be able to extract the juice out of them as if you were attempting them for the first time, right? So this is a little downside, but apart from it, it's a great. So how I did the practice, so Redman has this old GRE walkthroughs. So what he does in those walkthroughs is that he solves the test himself, right? And he does take questions as well, but he solves those questions himself. And what I did was when I learned the techniques, I used to validate my techniques while he was solving the test, right? And I believe it will be really helpful for you guys as well. So do check it out. Right, and for like as I told earlier that I did pick 300 words from his list as well, those that were not part of the Medusa. Right. Another thing was that so they have these podcasts which include like almost anyone who is a premium member can ask questions like whatever they feel like and get to the GRE exam, some tricks or anything that you want out of the GRE. So this was a good. These are kind of good sessions if you are, because everybody has similar questions. So you do get to realize and get to know some of the points that people have already asked. So it might also help. I think I have covered a lot. Uh, do we have any questions as of now? There are few slides left.
So guys, if you have any questions, now Puneet sir, we will be happy to answer that.
Well, in case we don't have any questions, I think we can.
Sir, chat box में देख लीजिए.
How to choose a university and its ground we should apply?
All right, Mr. Malhotra, there is a question from Ramsha Siddiqui. How to choose universities and in which round should we apply?
I think, thanks for asking this question. But what my understanding is that like everybody should be able to apply in round one, right? This is the round when you get to have least competition because like the universities and the institutions are quite open to accept profiles of all varieties. In fact, in the later rounds, what institutions do, and this is basically based on my understanding, that they try to include a variety and they go out for profiles that belong to the other end of the spectrum. So they want to bring in diversity. So I think this and regarding choosing the university, I think there are a lot of resources out there. Like you can go for the ranking. You should always first go for what kind of what are you looking for in a university? How is that going to place you? And these kind of factors. So I think that's a very broad question, and I think this might help you as a start. Should we hire admission consultant to get really help? I honestly I haven't hired one as of now, so I won't be able to help you with that. So sorry guys. How do you apply for based on the GRE score? Yes. So institutions that have GRE as a requirement to look for GRE score, the higher the better, definitely. And in fact, like in many cases, it is kind of a not a qualifier, I would say, but it simply adds a lot more weight to your profile. So it does matter. How do you manage the finances for moving out any scholarships? So the scholarships part, I think we have covered the like good profiles, and maybe if you are not from a very regular profile, it definitely helps you. Your story definitely helps you getting those scholarships, is what my understanding is. And managing the finances, I think, like it depends. It depends on a lot of factors. Like some people take loans, some people only go out with scholarships. So it depends on a lot of things. I think you need to see that in detail. Which university did I land in? So I haven't actually applied yet. However, this is in fact was basically I was planning. I am still planning to apply to universities for a business program. However, I haven't decided yet. But this was basically the prep part, and I had some time in the COVID world.
It's a question from Mutiur Rehman Khan. Does our college GPA matter during admission process after we clear GRE?
Yes, yes. So thank you for asking this. So, but it does matter. It does matter because, as I said, that universities do want to, gauge what you did in your, say, bachelor's, right? They want to understand how well you did, how well you performed in your class. It does matter. But I would say that a good GRE score definitely puts you in an advantaged position. So it basically is when you are applying for university or anything, right? So it's basically not dependent on only one of those things, right? They see it as a whole. So what matters is like the complete picture, your GPA, your scores in GRE or GMAT, and like what is your story, how you've been doing other curricular activities or your social work and these kind of things. Like they see it as a whole package, and uh, not just honing in only one of those things. This is what my understanding is.
Alright, from Almas Ansari, having a keen interest in data science, both MBA and MS, can be pursued. Preparing for GMAT and GRE simultaneously can work.
Sure. So as I shared earlier, that well, going for two different directions while preparing for two different exams may not be the best strategy, but like everybody works in a different way. You can put it off, like we do. However, yeah, there's one point that I'd also like. GRE has been on the trend and is being accepted as an alternative to GMAT in many business schools these days. However, there is also a caveat. Like I did get to know about this from students who applied through GRE in these schools. That like, even though they don't say it officially, and like I'm talking about a few schools, not every school, because most of the schools are quite treat them very equally these days. Because GRE had changed its pattern some 10 years ago or so, so it has become quite relevant to them now. But for a very few colleges, like if you got a GRE score, and then you can also get to have an equivalent of its equivalent in GMAT, right? There's a tool like that. EPS provides that. You can find it online. So out of say, for example, you have a 700 on GMAT and like a 326 on GRE, which was my score, right? So out of these, there are a few universities which would prefer a 700 GMAT rather than a GRE. But these are very few cases, and uh, a good thing would be that a good thing is that many universities do accept GRE scores for business programs. So it may help you if you are targeting some of these schools. You may want to look out what like if they have any preferences, and um, it may turn out that they do accept GRE scores. So it may help you preparing this for one of the exams.
Thank you so much, Mr. Malhotra, for your words of wisdom. On that note, we conclude the event. This is Sidra Arif Khan on behalf of the Robotic Society signing off. Thank you, everyone. Bye.